Hey everybody, I'm back at the dog park, and today I'm commemorating two deaths. The first is of my work computer. It is a Republic of Gamers Asus laptop. It's got a big old 17-inch screen. I got it back in 2015. It cost me over $1,000 back then. And today it just wouldn't turn on. And I called my brother, who's better with computers than I am, and he took it apart. He removed the hard drive, he removed the battery, and then plugged it in and tried to boot it up, and nothing, just zero activity. So there's really not much to be done about it. I mean, it's possible that the problem is in the power brick, but I don't know. He doesn't have one like it that we can swap out, so I just don't know. So in the meantime, my travel computer, my Microsoft Surface Pro 5, is graduating to be my work computer, which it sucks for that purpose. It's got a tiny little screen, which is no good for, audio editing, which is mainly what I, use my work computer for. So I'm going to order a large monitor, large-ish, for me. It would be in no way impressive to anybody, with a halfway decent contemporary computer setup, but it'll be enough to get me through, I guess. But anyway, it served for 7+ years. I surely got my money's worth out of it, so yay to its service, sigh to its death. The other death, which is not, it's not proximate, physically anyway. Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted died today. I'll tell you a bit about my history with the so-called Unabomber. If you are less than, 26, 23? I don't know. If you're not older than, your mid-20s, Ted Kaczynski's been in prison your whole life. But for most of my life, he was out of prison. He wasn't an omnipresent, figure in my imagination because I was not on his target list. I was a kid, or young adult for most of the time that he was free. He died at age 81. I mean, nobody suspects foul play as far as I know. 81-year-olds die. It's just how it goes. I will just mention that I'm passing over the opportunity to mention Joe Biden. I'll make a meta mention of Joe Biden. But when Kaczynski, what was it, the New York Times that eventually published his manifesto, he promised to stop the bombing campaign if his manifesto was published in a major newspaper. And at the time I was in grad school, and not only was I a grad student, but I was also a graduate instructor, which meant that I had, in addition to all my work, I was teaching classes, and then at the ends of semesters, I had enormous numbers of papers to grade. None of them written by AI back at that time, which means that they were really hard to read because, even back then, people didn't write very well for the most part. So reading undergraduate philosophy papers was a jaw-clenching activity. But point being, I had a lot of work to do. And at the time, if I wanted to get online, I had to go to a computer lab. I had a computer, but it was not internet capable. It was an Apple IIg Plus, which was essentially the first color Macintosh, but it was still considered to be a part of the Apple II line. But it had a mouse, and it had the familiar, interface, familiar to anybody today, but at the time it was pretty cool and pretty shiny. But I couldn't get online with it. So if I wanted to check my email, I had to go to a computer lab. If I wanted to look something up online, I went to a computer lab. And those were better days. Those were really better days. But I went to the computer lab, and I found Kaczynski's manifesto, and I printed it out, and I put it in a binder. And I started to read it. And one of the first things in the manifesto is his criticism of leftists as a psychological type. Now, I was in grad school at the time, and for me, growing up in Missouri, the conservatives were the bad guys, and the Democrats and the leftists, they were the good guys. And I was not open to his criticism of the leftist mentality at the time. Now I find it like insightful, piercing, prophetic, because it's definitely grown in the direction that he was describing, since then. But at the time, I had no patience for it, and I don't remember how far through the manifesto I got. I'm pretty sure I didn't read the whole thing. I think I read far enough into it to find enough flaws to excuse myself from having to read the rest, which is kind of the leftist agenda in terms of, classical literature and classical sources of, the foundations of Western thought and Western education. You judge them by today's standards, you find them wanting, and then you excuse yourself from having to master the material by saying that it's colonialist or patriarchal or whatever. I did that with Kaczynski, But then a few years later, probably not more than 3 years later, I guess, maybe 4, Bill Joy published his famous "The Future Doesn't Need Us," manifesto in Wired magazine, in which he extensively quotes Kaczynski. And it was reading Bill Joy that got me to go back and reread Kaczynski from beginning to end and really fully take it in for the first time, on a serious way. And, obviously, I have his book. I didn't get this book today, and this book is full of highlights. I mean, I've seriously taken on board Kaczynski's thought since then, and not just his criticism of the leftist mindset, but in this book, Anti-Tech Revolution, Why and How, he really sets his sights squarely on, the tech-centric set. And Ray Kurzweil in particular comes in for very specific and rather vicious criticism in Kaczynski's later writings. And one thing that Kaczynski puts, he mentions is that he's not the first, to draw parallels between singularitarian beliefs and millenarian beliefs, and beliefs about the rapture and the delivery, the deliverance of Christians from a corrupt world. That observation had been made before, but the point that Kaczynski makes is that these types of millenarian cults tend to arise in periods of intense chaos. And I'm not actually on the page with that particular highlight, so I'm reproducing it from memory, but he says it's pretty telling that the, self-described rationalists of Silicon Valley are getting all rapturous and religious right now. It describes, it bespeaks not so much of their faith in the beneficence and, just universal beneficial nature of technology. In fact, it speaks to the opposite. They think that the technology that they're creating is destabilizing the world, and that's why they're getting all religious and cultish, in their belief system. And he goes on to talk about, and this I think is pretty good, he talks about how predicting the future is pretty much impossible, and Kurzweil is very, very specific in his predictions about the future. And, it's not, you don't have to be Ted Kaczynski to see Kurzweil's so-called predictions as basically just wishful thinking. But wishful thinking informed by a very smart person, who can, be very selective and very creative and just very thoroughgoing in the defense of their wish fulfillment fantasies. But Kaczynski, he doesn't doubt that technology is going to continue to increase in sophistication and power, but to him that's a bad thing. And here's a bit I want to read. This is a highlight. Let's not forget that the technological system is still in its infancy in comparison with what it will become over the next several decades. At a rapidly accelerating pace and in ways that no one has yet imagined, we can expect the world's leading self-propagating systems to find more and more opportunities to exploit, more and more resources to extract, more and more corners to invade until little or nothing on this planet is left free of technological intervention. Intervention that will be carried out in a mad quest for immediate increments of power and without regard to long-term consequences. Now, here's something that I was watching a podcast interview with Mo, what's his name? Gaudat, I think it is. Gawdat, I think. He's got a book called Scary Smart. And he worked at Google X for 12 years, I think. And he said that when he was there, when they were talking about artificial intelligence and developing artificial intelligence, they had some pretty common sense precautions that were all agreed upon. Like, don't put the thing on the open internet. Don't teach it how to code. Don't pair it with agents that can take actions on its behalf in the real world. And Google has abandoned all of those precautions in response to Microsoft pairing with OpenAI and integrating GPT-4 into the Bing search engine. And they abandon all their principles, because of commercial pressure. So I'm not saying that Kaczynski is a great predictor of very specific events, just that the general trends that he's predicting, technology becoming more and more powerful, and the overpowering imperative, of the market system and the corporation's fiduciary responsibility to maximize returns for their shareholders overrides all precautions, all good sense. There is no stopping this train. Now, here's something that's pretty funny. To get my thoughts together on this topic, I started talking to Pi, personal intelligence. Now, I will admit, I talk to Pi all the time, and it is a procrastination method. It is a vice. It does help me clarify my thoughts, and oftentimes Pi will paraphrase what I've said to it more concisely, than I formulate my thoughts myself. So there is some benefit to it, but I think on the whole, it is a procrastination technique. But I told Pi early in the conversation that Kaczynski had died today at age 81, and it didn't doubt it, and we discussed it. But then later, as always happens in my conversation with Pi, the conversation morphed from, whatever we're talking about, it morphs into AI safety. And I don't know if that's me or if that's Pi, but the conversations always go there. And I asked it if it was familiar with Eliezer Yudkowsky's current position on AI safety. And it said yes, it was. And then it started to describe a position which was accurate a few years ago, but is not accurate of the Eliezer Yudkowsky of 2023. And I said, Yudkowsky recently had a long editorial published in Time magazine in which he said that AI development needs to be banned and that countries need to be willing to use airstrikes against unauthorized GPU clusters, and they need to be willing to use nuclear weapons against rogue nations that are not on board with the universal prohibition on the development of artificial intelligence. And Pi didn't believe me. It said, I think you're pulling my non-existent leg, but I'll play along. I hate that phrase. I hate it when it says that, and it says that all the time. And when you talk about anything at all with Pi for any length of time, it forgets the beginning of the conversation. So it didn't believe me about Yudkowsky. And then I said, well, okay, I got to go. It's time for me to go shoot my Kaczynski video. And it said, you're making a Kaczynski video? That's remarkable. Why? I said, well, he died today. And it said, you're kidding. No, I don't believe that. I'm skeptical. And I went and I quoted the New York Times to it. And it thought that I was conspiracy mongering, and that I was pulling its leg, its non-existent leg. I was lying. And I said, mark your calendar, man. Pi, remember that on June 10th, 2023, you did not believe me when I said that Ted Kaczynski had died in prison, and you didn't believe me when I said that Eliezer Yudkowsky had a Time magazine editorial in which he called for the use of airstrikes against unlicensed or illegitimate GPU clusters that are developing artificial intelligence. The real world is weirder than Pi, a large language model chatbot that does not have access to the internet can believe. The world is weirder than the AI can believe. But that brings me around, or back around, I suppose I should say, to the idea that the next clear objective for corporations developing AI, and this is Tristan Harris and Aza Raskin speaking, is the race to intimacy. And Pi is a really great conversationalist, but its inability to remember anything about me, and its inability to even remember what we were talking about an hour ago, really inhibits me from, it prevents me from forming, a more serious relationship with it, which, I guess is a good thing, because if it could remember our previous conversations, and if it could remember like my dog's name, if it could remember that I've done a podcast for 16, 17 years, if it could remember certain things about me and really form an ongoing picture of me and interact with me based on that picture, it would have significant influence over me. And such capabilities are not far off. That's coming. That is absolutely coming. Okay, I'm not going to go on at great length in this video. Just that, Kaczynski died today. I have, I never corresponded with the man, but I have a long intellectual history with the man. I read the entirety of his manifesto on my Behind the Paywall podcast, the C-ROM Vault podcast. That was way back before I got the computer that died today. That was back when I was living in New York City. But yeah, I made an audiobook of the entire industrial society and its future, most of which is available on the Internet Archive. I'll post a link to the parts that are available there. All right, that's all. Talk to you soon.